Hello and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you are new here. Today I'm going to show you how to make this gorgeous sweater that I am currently wearing. This piece has been my passion project for the past month or so now. It is heavily inspired by the knitted sweaters that I keep seeing on Pinterest because I'm not a big fan of knitting, but I am a big fan of those sweaters and their adorable designs. So I decided to figure out how I could make my own crochet version of those sweaters, and that's how this came to be, this gorgeous sweater. And now here is the tutorial for this sweater. For this tutorial, I will be using weight 4 acrylic yarn and a 5mm crochet hook. For the body of the sweater, I'm going to be using this white yarn, and then for all of the accents and designs that we're adding, I'll be using this dark blue yarn. We're going to start with our base color, which is going to be this white yarn. So now I'm going to go ahead and cast on with our starting color. To find the perfect measurements for your sweater, you're going to take the yarn that you're using and make a little swatch. So you're going to chain 10 and then do about 3 or 4 rows of single crochet onto that chain of 10. And once you have done that, you want to measure it and see how wide that piece is. So I did that for my own project and I found that it came out to be about 2.5 inches. So then you're going to find an already existing sweater in your closet that you like the fit of and that you want to kind of replicate that same fit with the sweater we're making today. So you're going to take that sweater or shirt and you're going to then measure the front panel. So you're going to go from one seam, so one side, to the other and see how many inches across that is. The shirt that I was working with was about 23 inches across. So then with that knowledge, I can then do the math to determine how many chains I would need in order to get 23 inches. So if I know that the 10 chains is 2.5 inches, I then did the math, rounding up a little bit so I had a little bit of extra room, and deduced that I needed to do 95 chains in order to reach 23 inches. So now that you have deduced the number of chains you're going to do, go ahead and make that chain for yourself now. I will be doing 95 as I mentioned before. Okay, so here I now have my chain of 95 for that front panel. So we're already going to go ahead and place our design into this very first row of crochet, and we're going to be switching colors with a method called Tapestry crochet. I'm going to do my very best to explain it to you right now, but if it's confusing, there are so many other tutorials on YouTube of people who are going to walk you through it a lot slower. So feel free to go look at a different tutorial if you need to learn how to tapestry crochet, but I'm going to do my very best to teach it to you here in this tutorial as well. So into our very first stitch, I'm just going to insert my hook, and I'm going to pick up my yarn like I would for a single crochet. And now typically in single crochet, you would then pick up this yarn and pull that through to make the single crochet, like so. But instead of picking up that yarn and pulling it through, I'm just going to leave these 2 loops here on my hook. I'm then going to drop my white yarn and I'm going to let it fall behind my project, like so. I'm then going to bring in my next color, which is this dark blue yarn. I'm going to pick this up with my hook and I'm just going to pull it through these 2 loops. So now we have the 2 loops of white yarn and the 1 loop of blue yarn here on our hook. I am then going to insert my hook right into the next stitch, and I'm making sure that the white yarn from before is on top of my hook. So where we have this white tail of yarn that we dropped to the back from before, I'm making sure that tail of yarn is on top of my hook like this. So then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick up this blue yarn like so. So again, we have those 2 loops of blue yarn, and now I want to switch colors again. So I'm going to go back to the white yarn and I'm going to drop that blue yarn, pick up the white yarn, and then pull that through these 2 loops. And then into the next stitch, again, I'm going to insert my hook right into that next chain stitch. I'm making sure this blue yarn is on top of the hook. I'm going to pick up my white yarn, so I have the 2 loops here on my hook, and then I'm going to switch to the blue yarn and pull that blue yarn through both loops, therefore switching colors back to blue. So here we have our first little color switches. We've got white, blue, and white, and now I'm all set to go ahead and do blue. And you're going to work your way all the way down this row, just switching colors at every single stitch. So then I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same process all the way down to the end of the row, and I'll see you once I'm done with that. So now at the end of this row, I'm making sure that I'm ending with blue yarn here. So then I can go ahead and chain 1 with that blue yarn, and then turn my work So we're working onto the other side, which the second row is going to be entirely with this blue yarn. We're not going to switch colors at all. However, I am going to make sure that I carry the white yarn with me. So once I'm at the end of this row, I want to have both the white and the blue yarn at that end. So the way that you're going to carry yarn is when you have your hook inserted into the stitch you're placing a single crochet into, you're going to then make sure that this yarn here, the white yarn that I'm not using, I'm still making sure that it is above the hook here. That way when I then place my single crochet, it sandwiches that white yarn into the stitch, and then that's going to carry the yarn along with me to the other side of the row. Again, I'm inserting my hook into this next stitch, and I have the white yarn above my hook, so then when I place my single crochet with the blue yarn, that white yarn is sort of sandwiched there in between the stitch. You can't see it on either side of the row. All you see is the blue yarn. Now I'm just going to go ahead and do one row of just plain single crochet with the dark blue yarn while carrying that white yarn along with me, and I'll see you once I'm done with the row. Okay, so now in this last stitch of the row, I've dropped the white yarn, so I'm no longer carrying it along with me, and I'm going to just finish off that very last stitch of blue. So now we have one full row here of this dark blue, and I'm going to chain one and turn my work. So now we're on to row number 3 of the sweater. And so now for row 3, we're going to do the same thing that we did for row 1, where I'm switching colors every other stitch, only I'm going to do it opposite of what we did in row 1. So in row 1, we started with white and then went to blue. For this row, I'm going to start with blue and then go to white. So I've got my blue stitch here with the 2 loops of yarn, and then just like before, I'm picking up that white yarn and pulling it through the 2 loops, therefore switching my color to white. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my next stitch in white, and then before I pull that yarn through, I'm switching to blue, pulling the blue through and switching to that color. Just like so, and now I'm going to work my way all the way down the row, switching colors every single stitch as we did in row number 1, and I'll see you at the end of this row. So now this last stitch here I am doing in blue, but we need to start our next row in white, so I'm going to still switch my colors over to white, like so. And now for this next row, I'm all set to chain 1 with my white yarn and turn my work. And now for this side, we're going to do the exact same thing we did with the dark blue yarn, where I'm going to be placing 1 single crochet into every single stitch all the way along this row. And just like before, where we carried the white yarn along with us as we did that row, I'm going to be carrying this blue yarn with me, so it's at the other end of the row once we're done. So just as we did with that previous row, every time I insert my hook into a stitch, I'm making sure that blue yarn is resting on top of my hook here. So I'm going to go ahead and just do this one row of single crochet all the way across, and I'll see you once I'm done with that. Okay, so now before I do this very last stitch of the row, I'm just dropping the blue yarn and I'm going to place my final single crochet. I'm then going to chain 1 and turn my work. And now to start this row, I'm going to do 1 single crochet, but I'm going to switch to my blue in that 1 stitch. So before I pull the white yarn through, I'm going to switch to blue and pull that blue yarn through instead. And then we're going to do 1 stitch of blue. And now instead of switching back to the white and the blue every single stitch, we're actually going to do 3 white stitches in between each blue. So there is my blue stitch, and now I'm going to do 1, 2 white stitches, and as I do these stitches, I'm carrying that blue yarn like I've showed you before. So I have the blue yarn above my hook, I'm carrying it with me. So there's 2 white stitches, and then in that 3rd stitch, which is the one right before we switch to the blue, I'm pulling up the 2 loops, and then I'm going to switch to the blue here, so I'm pulling the blue through that white stitch, like so. And then we're going to do the 1 white stitch, which again I've got the 2 loops, and then I pull the white yarn through, and now we get to do our 3 white stitches again, which I am carrying the blue yarn with me through those 3 white stitches. So as you can see here, we've got the blue stitch, the 3 white, and then the 1 blue again. So now I'm doing these 2 white stitches. In the 3rd one, I'm going to pull through the 2 loops, switch back to blue, so then I can have that 1 blue stitch like so, which we then switch back to white. So just like that, every 3 white stitches you do 1 blue stitch, or whatever color you're using. So now I'm going to go ahead and complete this row with the exact same pattern that I just showed you of 3 white, 1 blue all the way down to the end of the row, and I'll see you at the end. So now at the end of the row, I'm just going to chain 1 and then turn my work. And now, contrary to the row that we just did, we're going to be doing 3 blue for every 1 white. And we're also going to be lining up these blue stitches to sit right over the previous blue. We're going to make almost a capital T. So I'm going to start here with these 2 white stitches because now I'm lined up to do 3 blue right over this blue here. So again, I'm just going to switch and bring my blue. I don't think we've encountered this yet, so let me explain this to you quickly. When you're doing tapestry crochet, there is a distinct front and back to your design. On this design, as you can see, this is the front of our work. It's much cleaner. You can see all of the little stitches we're trying to make without much overlap. And then if you flip it over to this side, you can see it's quite messy. You can see where the yarn sort of looped around in the back. So this is very clearly, this messy side is the back of our work. This is the front of our work. So far with the way the rows have lined up, this has yet to be a problem, but now we're going to talk about how, because we're working into the back of the work, when I go to switch my yarn colors, in the past I would just put the yarn to the back, pick up my new color and bring that through. But because this is now the back of the work, we want to bring our yarn to the front. So when I drop the white yarn, I'm dropping it in the front of my project instead of the back of my project, because you want to always drop your yarn on the messy side or the wrong side of the project. So now I can bring my blue yarn and pull that through, and then do my 3 stitches of blue, carrying the white yarn with me, like so. And now on this 3rd blue stitch, I'm going to drop my blue yarn, so I'm bringing it to the front, to the messy side of the project, and then I'm going to pick up the white and pull that through, to then do our 1 stitch of white. And after our 1 stitch of white, I'm dropping that yarn to the front of the project, picking up the blue, and now we can do our 3 stitches of blue, which perfectly lines up with that previous stitch of blue where we're making sort of a capital T. And I'm just going to follow that exact same pattern all the way down to the end of this row, and I'll see you once I'm done with the row. Okay, and then for my last stitch here of the row, I'm ending on blue because I have my 3 blue here. But I do want to make sure I'm switching to white because I need my row on the next side to start with white. So right here in this last stitch, I'm switching to white. I'm going to go ahead and chain 1 and then turn my work. And so now for this next row, we're going to be doing the exact same thing that we did in the previous row. So this row here, we're going to repeat the exact same method. We're basically making diamonds, as you can see in the graph, or like little X's, where we have 1 stitch of blue, 3 stitches of blue, and then we're going to do 1 stitch again at the top to make this diamond shape. So this very first stitch I'm going to do white, but I'm going to switch to blue, and then again, because we're now working on the clean side and the messy side is at the back, I'm making sure when I drop my yarn, I'm dropping it to the back again. So now we've switched to blue, and I'm going to do my 1 stitch of blue, and then we're going to do 3 stitches of white. Now in this 3rd stitch of white, I'm switching back to the blue. That way into this middle stitch here, we can place a blue. So I'm going to go ahead and work this same pattern all the way down to the end of the row, and I'll see you once I'm done with that. So now in the last stitch of the row, which is still going to be white, I'm going to drop my blue yarn so we don't have to carry it through that last stitch and cause a weird lump. And I'm going to go ahead and do my last stitch, and then chain 1 and turn my work. And now on this side, we're going to be doing just 1 row of plain white crochet, and as always, I'm carrying that blue yarn with me. So in every single one of these stitches, I'm making sure the blue yarn is above my hook, and that way it's getting sandwiched in between the stitch and it's getting carried along to the end of the row. And now in my last stitch of the row, I'm going to be switching to my blue yarn. So I've got my 2 loops of white, and I'm going to pull that blue through. That way I can then chain 1 with the blue and turn my work. And the reason why I switched to blue is because if we look down here at the start of our pattern, and I'm looking at this top row of the blue, white, and whichever one I started on for that top row, which is the blue in my case, is the one I want to start on here. So if by chance you have your top row being white, then you don't want to switch to the blue and you want to keep it white, or whatever color you're using. And I'm going to do my first stitch now in blue, but I'm going to switch to white, so I've got the 2 loops, and now I'm pulling that white through. So then my next stitch can be in white. So just like we did at the beginning of this design, I am switching colors for every single stitch. Okay, so now I'm making sure that I am indeed ending on blue, and if you have a different count than me, so you ended up ending with your white yarn or whatever color you're using, then at this time you would go ahead and switch to the blue yarn. That way when you chain 1 and then turn your work like I am doing, you're all set to go and start working with the blue yarn. And now for this row, we're just going to do the entire thing with solid blue yarn. So I'm just doing single crochets of blue into every single stitch. And like always, I am carrying that white yarn with me over to the other side of the row. So now at the end of the row, I'm going to chain one and turn my work. And now just like we did in the previous part of this design down here, you're going to go ahead and switch colors with every single stitch opposite to the color switches you have in the previous row. So in this row, we switch colors every single stitch, and now this time I'm doing the same thing, but opposite. So where it's white below here, I'm doing blue. Where it's blue below here, I'm doing white. And I'm going to go ahead and do this all the way down for the rest of this row, and I'll see you at the end of the row. Okay, so I'm now ending on the white yarn here, and I'm going to go ahead and chain one so I can turn my work. And this concludes our first design of the sweater. We're not going to need the blue yarn for quite a while still, so I'm going to go ahead and actually cast off. So I'm cutting this yarn, leaving quite a long tail so that I can weave it in later. So I have now casted off the blue yarn. I'm only working with the white yarn now, and I'm going to just do a bunch of rows of single crochet with this white yarn. And just for reference, at this point in the project, your design should be looking like this. So now you're going to go ahead and complete several rows with just your plain sweater color, as I did here with the white yarn. So from here to here, I ended up doing 36 rows of single crochet, and I'm now ready to start our next design. The way you can determine how long you need this to be, you're going to hold this panel up to the front of your body where the bottom here is in line with your waist, and keep in mind that we will be adding another inch or so to the bottom. So wherever you want the sweater to lay, remember that there will be some extra fabric as well. And then the top portion of the panel here should land slightly below your chest, because we want the next design to go across your chest, and the next design is going to take up about 5.5 inches of space. So when I hold this panel up to the front of my body, I then take a ruler and measure 5.5 additional inches to see where that lands. And for me, it lands sort of at my collar, a little bit below my collar, which is perfect. You can go ahead and start up on our next portion of the design. So however many rows you ended up doing of that plain single crochet, just make sure whichever one you ended on the wrong side of the project, so that way once we start our design we can start it on the right side of the project. So now that that's all out of the way, let's get started on the design. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my project. So now we're facing the right side here, and we're all ready to start on our next row. So this is going to be our first row of this design. So the first 3 stitches I'm just going to do in plain white, or whatever your solid color is. You're going to do 3 stitches. And in that third stitch, we're going to prepare to switch colors. And then I'm going to bring in my dark blue yarn, which I'm going to pull through both loops like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and complete our next stitch in dark blue, which before I can complete that stitch, I'm going to switch back over to white. So we're going to switch over to white and then do another 3 stitches of white. And then in that third stitch, I'm going to switch back over to blue. And this is just as we were doing before in the previous design. You're just going to switch back and forth. Every 3 white stitches, you're going to switch and do 1 blue stitch. And then I'm going to do 3 white stitches. And when I do those 3 white stitches in between the blue, I'm making sure that I am carrying the yarn with me. So I have the blue yarn on top of my hook as well. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat this same pattern as I've been doing already. And I'll see you once I reach the end of the row. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue this exact same pattern of stitches all the way down to the end of the row. And I'll see you once I reach the end. Okay, so I'm going to be ending on a blue stitch then, which is perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and chain 1 and then turn my work. And now as you can see on the graph here, we're making these little like plus signs. So in the first row, we did the very bottom of the sign, and now we're doing that middle row where we have mostly blue. So I have the little bottom piece here, and now I've got 1 blue lined up with that, and then the next blue on the outside. So this one is a half completed plus sign because it is on the edge. But now I'm going to go ahead and switch to my white yarn, and now we're only going to do 1 stitch in white yarn. So you're just going to do 3 blue, 1 white, 3 blue, 1 white, all the way down to the end of the row. And remember, because we are working on the wrong side, as you can see here, we have the wrong side facing up, that whenever you switch colors, you want to pull your yarn to the front, because you always want to leave your yarn on the wrong side. Okay, and I've done my 1 white stitch, and I'm going to end off here on a blue stitch. So I'm going to quickly switch over from the blue to the white, so that way I can start my next row with my base color. So I'm going to chain 1 with that white and turn my work. And now in this next row, we're going to complete these little diamond or plus sign shapes by doing 3 white, 1 blue, like we did in that earlier row. So here's 3 white, and then I'm switching to 1 blue, And I'm going to go ahead and do 1 blue stitch and then switch over to white to do 3 white stitches. And you want to make sure that that 1 blue stitch is lined up with the 1 blue stitch 2 rows back now, so you have your little plus sign like so. So now I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same pattern of 3 white, 1 blue, all the way down to the end of the row, and I'll see you once I reach the end. And now at the end of the row here, I've done my 3 stitches of white, so now I have to quick switch over to blue. 1 stitch of blue here in this very last stitch, and then I'm going to switch back over to white, so that way we're ending on our solid color, so I can chain 1 and turn my work like so, and now we're all set to do 1 row of just solid white. So in every single one of these stitches, we're going to place 1 single crochet of plain white, and like always, you want to make sure that you're carrying that blue yarn with you over to the other side. So whenever I do a stitch, I'm making sure the blue yarn is resting on top of my hook, so that way when I do my single crochet, it sandwiches that yarn in between the stitch, and I can then carry it along with me to the other side of the row. So now at the end of the row, I'm going to chain 1 and then turn my work. And then I'm going to start with that 1 single crochet, but before I finish off that stitch, I'm going to then right away switch to blue. And then into that next stitch, we're going to do the exact same thing, where I'm going to start doing that single crochet, but then switch to white. And we're going to be making one of these rows where we just switch colors with every single stitch. So I'm ending here on the dark blue yarn, which is absolutely perfect. So now I'm going to go ahead and chain 1 and turn our work. And now I'm just going to do 1 solid row of the dark blue yarn. So I'm just placing 1 single crochet stitch of this blue yarn into every single stitch all the way across. And of course, I'm making sure that I'm carrying the white yarn with me over to the other side of our project. Now in my last stitch, I'm going to go ahead and chain 1 and then turn my work. And now we are going to be doing the same thing we did previously, where we're going to switch colors with every single stitch, only this time you want to make sure that you're doing the opposite colors. So if we look down to the row previous to this last one, you can see I did white, blue, white, blue, white, blue. So now in this row, I'm going to do blue, white, blue, white. That way it's opposite of what we did before. So I'm going to go ahead and place my first stitch here with the blue, and I'm ending the row here on the white yarn, which is absolutely perfect. So then you can chain 1 with that white or base color and turn your work. And now we're going to go ahead and do 1 row of just solid white single crochet all the way down while carrying that blue yarn with you. And when I'm doing this row, when I reach the portion here where I'm only 6 stitches away from the end, I'm going to go ahead and drop this blue yarn. And I'm just going to continue doing these last few stitches with just single crochet of the white yarn without carrying that blue with me. Like so. And now into this last stitch, single crochet. I'm then going to chain 1 and turn my work. So now our first 6 stitches of this row are just going to be plain white single crochet. And then before I complete that last stitch, I'm going to go ahead and switch colors over to the blue yarn, which because we dropped the blue yarn before, it's already sitting here perfectly lined up, ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that yarn through like so. And now we're going to do 2 stitches of blue yarn. And then the second stitch we're going to leave uncompleted and then go ahead and switch over to that white yarn, which we're then going to do 3 stitches of white. And then in that third stitch, we're going to switch back to blue. And then we're going to do 2 stitches with the blue. So there's 1. And then in the second stitch, we're going to switch back over to white. And now we're going to do 8 stitches of white, carrying that blue yarn along with us. So I'm keeping the blue yarn on top of my hook. And I'm going to go ahead and do 8 stitches. And now into our 8th stitch here, I'm not going to complete that stitch. Instead, I'm going to switch over to blue. Like so, and then we're going to do 2 stitches of blue, and then in that second stitch we're going to switch back over to white, so we can then do 3 stitches of white. And then in that third stitch I'm going to leave it uncompleted, that way we can switch back to blue for 2 stitches of blue. And then I'm switching back to white, and now we're going to go ahead and do 8 stitches of white. And then you're going to follow that exact same pattern all the way down to the end of the row, so you're going to do 8 stitches, 2, 3, 2, 8. So now I'm going to go ahead and chain 1 and then turn my work. And then for this row, we're going to be placing 1 blue stitch on the borders of each of these blue stitches of the previous row. So 1 here and here right on the border. So I'm going to go ahead and place the white single crochet up to that stitch. So now in this stitch here, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to blue. And again, because I'm working with the wrong side in the front of my project, I'm bringing my yarn to the front when I drop it. So now I'm going to pick up the blue yarn, and we're going to do 1 stitch of blue right on the border of the blue of the previous row. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to white, and then we're going to do 2 stitches of white, And in that second stitch, I'm going to leave it uncompleted. That way I can then switch back to the blue, like so. And then we're going to do 1 stitch of blue, and then switch back to white, 1 stitch of white, and switch back to blue, and then 1 stitch of blue. And then we're going to do 2 stitches of white here on top of those blue stitches of the previous row. And then we're going to switch back to blue for 1 stitch of blue, and then back to white. So it should look like this, where you have your 2 blue stitches of the previous row, and then on the border of those 2 stitches in this next row here, we have 2 blue stitches as well. And so you're just going to go ahead and do this all the way down the rest of the row. I'm now going to place white single crochet all the way down until I reach this next section of blue, where I'm then going to place a blue stitch on the outside of each of these blue stitches of the previous row. And then again, the same thing for this one, and for these as well. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and chain 1 and then turn our work. So now your design should look something like this, and you can clearly tell where each of the flowers are now. So every single one of these is a different flower. For this row, we're going to go ahead and start off by doing white single crochet up until the stitch before the blue stitch of the previous row. And now in this stitch here, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my blue yarn, and we're going to do 2 stitches of blue. And then I'm going to switch over to white, and we're going to do 3 stitches of white. So you should end up on your last stitch of white being on this blue stitch of the previous row. So then we can switch over to blue, and now we can place a blue stitch right in between these 2 blue stitches of the previous row. So right in that 1 white stitch, we're going to place a single blue stitch and then switch back to white. And now we're going to do 3 stitches of white single crochet, which in this 3rd stitch here, I'm going to switch back to blue. And this should line up in a way that your first blue stitch here is going to be right on top of the last blue stitch of the previous row. Then I'm placing another blue stitch right on top, and we're going to do 1 more stitch of blue and then switch over to white. And now we are moving on to our second flower, so I'm going to place single crochets of white all the way up until I reach the stitch right before that first blue stitch of the next flower. So it should look like this, and now I'm going to go ahead and repeat that exact same pattern of stitches all the way across the rest of this row. And then for the flower pattern for the next row here, I'm going to go ahead and switch to blue when I am 1 stitch away from the blue of the previous stitch, that very first blue of the flower, and then into that stitch we're going to do 1 blue stitch. I'm then going to switch right back to white, and we're going to do 2 white stitches. So on top of the 2 blue stitches of the previous row, we're going to do white. And now I'm going to switch right back to blue, and then we're just going to do 1 stitch here in blue. I am then going to do 2 white stitches, and into that second stitch there, I'm going to switch back over to blue, which then should perfectly line you up with this blue stitch of the previous row that's like right in the middle of the 2 flower petals. So then right into that blue stitch, we're going to place another blue stitch, and then switch right back to white. I then did 2 white stitches, which should bring you to the stitch right before this little section of blue. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my blue yarn, and then we're going to do 1 stitch of blue, switch back to white, 2 stitches of white, so right on top of the blue stitches from the previous row, I am doing 2 stitches of white, switch back to blue, and then right here, I'm just going to do 1 stitch of blue. I'm then going to go ahead and switch back to my white yarn, and we're going to single crochet over to the next flower. At this point, your design should look like this, and now I'm going to go ahead and repeat that same stitch pattern all the way down to the end of the row. Okay, and then for the next row of the flower design, you're going to go ahead and crochet with that base color, which for me is the white, up until I reach the very first color of blue here. So now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the blue yarn. So now into this very first stitch of blue, I can place another stitch of blue like so. I'm then going to switch back to white, and we're going to do 3 stitches with white. And your final or 3rd stitch should be right on top of that blue stitch of the previous row. I'm then going to switch back to blue, and we're going to do 1 stitch of blue, and then back to white, and then we're going to do 1 stitch of white, which brings us right up to this blue stitch sort of in the core of the flower, which we're going to place another blue stitch on top of. So I'm switching back to blue. Here's 1 blue stitch right in that core of the flower. We're then going to go back to white. Here's 1 white stitch, back to blue, and now into the stitch right before this blue stitch of the previous row, you want to place 1 blue stitch. We're then going to switch back to the white yarn, and I'm now going to do 3 stitches of white yarn, and then this 3rd stitch here should bring you up flush with the very last blue stitch of this flower. So I'm going to go ahead and do 1 stitch of blue on top of that previous blue stitch. I'm then going to switch back to white, that way we can then begin our next flower. And now your design should be looking like this. For this next row of the flower pattern, you're going to single crochet with the base color, which for me is white, all the way until you're on top of the very first blue stitch of the flower. So right onto this stitch here, I'm going to do an uncompleted single crochet, so I can then switch over to my blue and pull that through the loops. So now we're going to go ahead and do 1 stitch of blue and then switch right back to white, where I'm then going to do 3 stitches of white, which should bring you right on top of this blue stitch here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back to blue. We're going to do 1 stitch of blue, back to white, 1 stitch of white, which should be on top of this blue stitch of the previous row, and then I'm going back to blue to do 1 stitch of blue, like so. I'm then going to switch back to white, and we're going to do 3 stitches of white, which in this last stitch I'm going to switch back to blue, do 1 blue stitch, and then switch right back to white. And that should bring you right up to the very last stitch of blue in that previous row for that flower. So then we're going to go ahead and just single crochet all the way over to the next flower, and then repeat that same process for the rest of the row. And now for our next row of this flower design, just like we did before, I'm going to place a single crochet of white all the way up until I reach the very first blue stitch of each flower, and then I'm going to place one as well on top of that blue stitch of the previous row, but I'm not going to complete it because instead I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my blue yarn. And now we're going to do 3 stitches of blue, and that 3rd stitch should land right before the blue stitch of the previous row. I'm then going to go ahead and switch over to white, and we're going to do 3 stitches of white yarn, which the last of these 3 stitches should land on this blue stitch of the previous row. I'm then going to switch back over to blue, and we're going to go ahead and do 3 stitches of blue yarn, which the 3rd stitch here should land right before the blue stitch of the previous row. So then I can switch back to white, and we can go ahead and place single crochets of white yarn all the way over to the next flower. And then you're going to go ahead and repeat that exact same stitch pattern all the way down to the end of the row. For this next row of the flower, I'm going to be working with my white single crochets all the way up until I am just 1 stitch away from the very first blue stitch in the former row, and I'm going to go ahead and switch over to blue. And then I'm going to place 1 blue stitch here right before the blue that starts in the previous row. And then before I can continue, I'm going to switch back to white, and then I'm going to place 3 stitches of white, which should line up perfectly with these stitches of blue in that previous row. In that 3rd stitch, I'm going to switch back over to blue, and I'm going to place 1 stitch of blue, and then switching back over to white, do 1 stitch of white, switch back over to blue, 1 stitch of blue, switch back over to white, and now we should be lined up with this next section of 3 blue stitches in the previous row, which we can then place 3 white stitches on top of those 3 blue stitches. In this last stitch, I'm then going to switch over to blue and place 1 final stitch for this flower in blue. I'm then going to switch over to white, and then we're moving on to the next flower, and then I will continue that same stitch pattern for the rest of the flowers in the row, and at this point your design should be looking like this. And now for this next row of flower design, I'm going to single crochet with my white yarn up until I am 1 stitch away from the first blue stitch of the flower, which is where I'm at right now. So now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my blue yarn, and then I'm going to do 1 blue stitch and then switch right back over to white, where we're then going to do 3 stitches with the white yarn. And on that 3rd stitch, I'm going to switch right back over to blue, and then I'm going to place 1 blue stitch, and then we're going to do 1 stitch in blue and then switch right back over to white. And if it's lined up correctly, then you should be placing this white stitch right onto the blue stitch of the previous row, like so, and then switch right back over to blue, which this blue stitch should be placed on top of the white stitch of the previous row. And then from the blue, I'm going to switch back to white, and then that 1 stitch of white on top of the blue stitch of the previous row. I'm then going to switch back to blue. I'm going to do 1 stitch of blue and then switch over to white, and then 3 stitches of white, which your 3rd stitch should land on top of the blue stitch of the previous row, that very last blue stitch of the flower. And I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my blue yarn, and then we're going to finally do just 1 stitch here of blue, and then I'm switching over to white, and I'm going to continue on to the next flower and repeat that exact same stitch pattern all the way down for the rest of the row. For this row, I'm going to single crochet with my white or my base color up until I reach the stitch right before the colored stitch here, that blue stitch of the previous row. And now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my blue yarn. So then I can place one blue stitch right on top of the blue stitch of that previous row, and then switch right back over to my white yarn. I'm then going to do 2 stitches with the white yarn, and after that second stitch, I'm going to switch right back to my blue yarn. I'm then going to do 1 stitch of blue, and then switch back to white. I am then going to do 2 stitches of white and switch back to blue. And now if it's lined up correctly, then you should have this one blue stitch going right on top of the same blue stitch of the previous row. So I'm going to go ahead and do that one blue stitch and then switch right back to white, like so. I'm then going to do 2 stitches of white before switching right back to blue. And then I'm going to do 1 stitch of blue, switch back to white, 2 stitches of white, switch back to blue. And then this final 1 stitch of blue should be right on top of the blue stitch at the end of the flower in the previous row. So I'm going to go ahead and do that one last stitch of blue and then switch back to white, and I'm ready to continue on to the next flower and repeat that same process. For this next row, I'm going to single crochet with my white yarn all the way up until I'm on top of this very first colored blue stitch from the previous row. So I've completed that there, and I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my blue yarn. And then we're going to do the next 2 stitches in blue. So right on top of these 2 white stitches, I'm going to be placing 2 blue stitches, which should bring you right up to this next blue stitch of the previous row. So I'm then going to switch right over to white. And now these next 3 stitches are going to be with the white yarn. I'm going to switch over to my blue yarn here on that 3rd stitch. And now into this blue stitch of the previous row, I'm going to place 1 more blue stitch here. I'm then switching right back to white. And I'm going to do 3 stitches with the white yarn, and that 3rd stitch should land on the blue stitch of the previous row, where I'm then going to go ahead and switch right back to blue. And now these next 2 stitches are going to be in blue. I'm switching back to white, and now the very first stitch here of my white yarn should be right into the last colored stitch of the last row. So this is my very last stitch for the flower in the last row, and that's where I'm then placing this white stitch. And I'm then going to single crochet with my base yarn over to the other flower, where I will repeat that exact same process. For this next row, I'm going to single crochet with my base or my white yarn up until I am on top of the very first of the blue stitches. So right here, we have our 2 stitches of blue from the previous row. I'm going to insert my hook and do 1 stitch of white on top of that very first of the 2 blue stitches. I am then going to go ahead and switch over to my blue yarn, and on top of the second of those 2 blue stitches, I'm going to place 1 blue stitch and then switch right back to the white yarn. I'm then going to do 2 stitches with the white yarn and switch over to blue. We're going to do 1 stitch of blue, switch over to white, and then do 1 stitch of white, which should line up to be on top of this blue stitch of the previous row. So I'm doing 1 stitch of white and then switching back to blue. So I'm then going to do 1 stitch of blue and then switch right back to white. I'm then going to do 2 stitches of white, 2, I'm switching back to blue, and this should bring us to those 2 stitches at the end of the flower of the previous row. So into the very first of those 2 stitches, I'm going to place 1 blue stitch and then switch over to white. And now I'm going to go ahead and single crochet with this white all the way over to the next flower, and repeat this same process all the way down the rest of the row with the rest of the flowers. We are now on to the very last row here of the flower design. So for this row, I'm single crocheting with that white yarn all the way up until I am on top of the very first blue stitch here of the flower. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook right into that blue stitch, pull up some white yarn, and then switch right over to the blue yarn. Then going to place 2 stitches of blue yarn, which should be in line with these 2 stitches of white yarn in the previous row. I'm going to switch right over to my white yarn, and then I'm going to place 3 white stitches. I'm then going to switch over to blue, and this should be lined up here with these 2 white stitches of the previous row, which I'm then going to place 2 blue stitches, which this brings us right next to the very last stitch of the flower. I'm then going to switch right over to white, and I'm going to place a white single crochet right into that last stitch of the flower, and then I'm going to go ahead and single crochet stitch all the way over to the next flower. So this is what your design should be looking like right now, and I'm going to go ahead and finish off the rest of this row, and then we'll move on to the rest of the sweater. And now we're going to go ahead and complete those last few rows of the design. So right now I'm just doing 1 row of solid white single crochet all the way across, and like always I am carrying that blue yarn with me, so that way it's at the other end of the row once I'm done. And then for this next row, just like we've done several times already in this project, I'm going to go ahead and switch colors with every single stitch. So I'm switching from white to blue, from blue to white, from white to blue, just back and forth every single stitch all the way down this 1 row. And now my last stitch of this row is going to be with the dark blue, which is perfect. But if you're ending on your base color, you're going to want to switch now over to the accent color, so then you can chain one and turn your work. And now I'm just going to do one solid row, all of single crochets here with the dark blue yarn. And like always, I'm going to carry that white yarn with me over to the other side. In this next row, I'm going to be switching colors in every single stitch yet again, only this time I'm going to be doing this opposite to the previous row. So last time that we switched colors every single stitch, you can see I have white, blue, white, blue. So now this time I'm going to do blue, white, blue, white. So every single stitch all the way down to the end of the row, I'm going to be switching colors back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish up this row, and I'll see you once I'm done with that. Now this next row is going to be entirely made up of the white yarn or whatever your base color is. So this entire row, I'm just going to place a single crochet into every single stitch all the way across, carrying that blue yarn with me, of course, as I always do. And I'm going to see you once I reach the end of the row. On this very last stitch of the row, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my dark blue yarn so I can then chain one and turn my work. And now this first stitch of the row I'm going to do with my dark blue yarn and then switch right back over to the white yarn. And right here we're going to start making those little diamonds or plus signs that we've made previously. So now I'm going to go ahead and complete these next 4 stitches with white yarn. And here in our 4th stitch, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the blue yarn. And then I'm going to do 1 stitch of blue, switch back to white, and then 4 stitches of white. And you're going to follow that exact same pattern of 4 white, 1 blue, all the way down to the end of the row. Now for this next row, we're going to make those sort of like capital T shapes here in the row, just like we did before. So I'm going to go ahead and single crochet with my white yarn up until I am 1 stitch away from that very first blue yarn stitch. And now right here where I'm 1 stitch away, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my dark blue yarn. So now I'm going to place 3 stitches with the blue yarns, making that sort of capital T shape, like so. I'm then going to switch over to my white yarn. And now here I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my dark blue, where I can then place my 3 blue stitches before, during, and after that blue stitch of the previous row. And I'm going to go ahead and repeat that same pattern all the way down for the rest of the row. And now we are on to that final row of the design for the front panel of our sweater, which I'm just finishing up that little plus sign or diamond design here, which I'm going to do by single crocheting with my white yarn up until I'm on top of the very first of these 3 blue stitches of the previous row. So now the first of these 3 blue stitches gets 1 single crochet in the white, and then I'm going to switch over to my blue yarn. So then in the middle of these 3 stitches, I can place 1 blue stitch and then switch back to white, therefore making a little plus sign or a little diamond shape. And I'm then going to crochet with my white or my base color over to the next spot here, and I'm going to place 1 single crochet right into the very first of those 3 blue stitches of the previous row. I'm then going to switch over to my blue yarn, and into the very middle of those 3 stitches we're going to place 1 blue stitch and then switch right back to the white yarn to then continue on and do that exact same pattern all the way down to the end of the row, which should leave your design looking like this. So at this point, this is what your design should be looking like, and I went ahead and cast it off with that blue yarn after I completed that last row. I then did an additional 9 rows of single crochet at the top here, and you can do as many rows as you want until the piece is tall enough, and then you're going to go ahead and mark the collar. So to mark where we want the collar, I'm going to take my crochet panel here, and I'm holding it up where the top part is in line with my collarbone. So right where my collarbone is, I'm holding it right up there flush with my collarbone. I'm gonna go ahead and mark kind of where I want the collar to start. So I'm just gonna kind of estimate, and I'm gonna use the already existing straps I have here for my tank top as a guideline. So then I'm gonna go ahead and place a stitch marker about here and one like about here. And now that I have that marked, we can go back to our crochet station, make sure they're even, and actually start the collar itself. So now that I have my collar marked with these 2 bobby pins here on both sides, you're going to want to go ahead and count the number of stitches from this corner to the first stitch marker or bobby pin, and then from this corner to the next stitch marker or bobby pin. And just make sure that it's the same number of stitches on both sides. You might need to move these over 1 or 2 stitches to make sure it's even. But once you have concluded that your stitch markers are in the correct spot, we can begin working on the collar. So I'm going to go right back and pick up that yarn. So I'm going to start by simply working my way towards that first stitch marker with just single crochets here. And I'm going to pause here where I am just one stitch away from that stitch marker, and we're going to go ahead and do a decrease. So I'm going to remove my bobby pin or my stitch marker. I'm going to insert my hook right into this next stitch, pick up my yarn as if I'm about to do a single crochet, but before I complete that stitch, I'm going to insert my hook right into the next stitch, and then pick up my yarn. So now I have 3 loops here on my hook, and I'm going to go ahead and pull through all 3 loops like so, therefore making a decrease because what we just did was made these 2 stitches into 1 stitch. So I'm then going to go ahead and chain 1, and I'm going to turn my work, and now just like we just did, I'm going to insert my hook right into that first stitch, pick up my yarn, and then before I can complete that stitch, I'm going to insert my hook into the next stitch, pick up some yarn. So I have 3 loops on my hook. I'm going to then pull through all 3 loops, therefore completing another decrease. I'm then going to just single crochet like normal all the way down back to the end of this row here. So now at the end of the row here, I'm going to go ahead and just chain 1 and then turn my work. And now I'm going to simply repeat that same process where I'm going to place single crochets all the way down until I reach the last 2 stitches of this row, where I'm then going to do a decrease where I combine the 2 stitches together as I demonstrated previously, and then I will turn my work, complete another decrease, and work my way back. So I'm going to go ahead and do a couple rows here with the decreases, and I'll see you once I'm done with that. So here I have completed one side of the collar. I went ahead and did 8 rows with the decrease, and then I did 2 normal rows without the decrease because the collar was starting to get too wide for my liking, but I did need a little bit more height. So I did those 2 extra rows without the decrease, and you want this portion to be about 2.5 inches long or so. So basically when you hold this up to the front of your body with the collar in place where it should be, the top row here of this shoulder should land right on the top middle portion of your shoulder. So when you have the other panel coming in here, the seam at the top will be right in the middle of your shoulder. So again, that's going to be about 2.5 inches, but just hold it up to your body and make sure you have the right amount of height here on the shoulder. And so that's exactly what I have. So I'm going to go ahead and cast off. I already chained 1. I'm going to cut my yarn, leaving a bit of a tail so I can weave it in later. And I'm going to go ahead and just cast off of that side of the sweater. And so now I'm going over to the other side of our panel here where we have our other stitch marker. I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook right into the first stitch in this corner. And then I'm going to cast on with that white yarn, and I'm going to go ahead and do that exact same thing that we just did on the other side. So I'm going to single crochet all the way up until I'm 1 stitch away from the stitch marker. Okay, so now here I am just about 1 stitch away from my stitch marker. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that stitch marker, and just like we did on the other side, I'm going to go ahead and decrease. I'm then going to chain 1 and turn my work. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing on this side as I did on the other side. So I'm going to then decrease starting off, and I'm going to do the exact same number of rows of decreasing that I did on the other side of the collar. And so now here I have the other collar or shoulder portion completed with the exact same number of rows as I did on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and cast off with this color as well. Now I don't think I can fit it entirely on the camera here, but this is going to be your first panel then completed, and now you're going to do the exact same thing for another panel. Now that I have completed both of my panels, I'm going to go ahead and attach them right at the collar. So I'm going to go ahead and lay each panel down one on top of the other, and I'm making sure I have the right sides together. So the messy side here is going to be face up on both sides, and then the clean part of our design is on the inside. I'm then going to go ahead and find the top of the collar here where we have our 2 shoulder portions. We have this one and then the one on this side. I'm going to go ahead and just attach both of these together. So to attach the shoulders together, you can either just use some yarn and a needle and just sew along the top here, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and slip stitch these together because that goes a lot faster and I really do not like sewing. So I prefer just to slip stitch everything when I crochet. So I'm going to do that by inserting my hook into the very first stitch here on our first panel, and then going over to the second panel and picking up the very first stitch of that second panel. So both of these shoulder portions of the 2 panels should be lined up perfectly even, and I have both of the stitches here right on my hook. I am then going to bring some yarn through, and I'm just going to chain 1 to lock it in place, and now we're all set to slip stitch along the rest of the top here. So now I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook right into that next stitch, the second stitch of that first panel, and then I'm going to the second panel, picking up the second stitch of the second panel. I'm then going to go ahead and pick up some more yarn, and I'm going to pull it through all of the loops on my hook, therefore completing a slip stitch. And I'm going to do this with every single stitch all the way down both panels. And I keep my tension very loose as I work my way down this shoulder, because if the tension is too tight, the material is going to kind of bunch up and you're going to have weird ripples in your shoulder portion. So in order to keep it all laying smooth and flat, I just keep my tension very loose. That way the material has room to move. So then after I've connected those last 2 stitches here, I'm going to go ahead and chain 1 and then just cut my yarn to cast off. I'm now going to flip my work. So now we have the other shoulder portion here, and this side is still not connected, so I'm going to line them up correctly so that all of the stitches are lined up on both sides of the panels. And then I'm going to do that exact same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and just insert my hook right into that first stitch on both panels, like so. I'm then going to pull that yarn through and chain 1 to lock it in place. And then just like I did on the other side, I'm going to slip stitch into every single stitch all the way down the rest of this shoulder portion. And then just like on the other side, after I'm done slip stitching into that very last stitch, I'm going to chain 1 and then cut my yarn to cast off. So now you're going to want to go ahead and try on this piece. Make sure you like the way it fits. And then what you're going to do is kind of pinch the side of the project, pinch the 2 panels together under your arm until you find where you want the sleeve to start. I then went ahead and marked that row with a bobby pin or a stitch marker here. I also went ahead and marked the exact same spot on the other side of that panel. I have both sides marked right here at about like the middle to the top of the flower design, and I have the exact same stitch marker on the other side, which where I marked the start of the armhole here for reference is about 7.5 inches down from the top of the shoulder. So now we're going to go ahead and work our way up along the side here to this stitch marker so we can begin the sleeve. So I'm going all the way down to the bottom of these 2 panels, and I'm going to make sure that they're completely lined up here, that the designs are lined up on both sides. And I am then going to go ahead and insert my hook into that very bottom stitch there of the first panel, and I'm going to go over to the other side and find that exact same stitch on the other side. I'm going to insert my hook into the first stitch on both sides of both panels. I'm now going to bring in my white yarn, or whatever your base color is here. I'm going to pick up that yarn and pull it through both stitches and then chain 1 to lock it in place. So again, keeping my tension very loose and then also keeping the panels perfectly lined up on both sides, I'm just going to go ahead and slip stitch all the way up the side of both panels until I reach that stitch marker that we placed here towards the top of the sweater. I have now slip stitched all the way up the side of the sweater here, and I've reached the stitch marker. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove that stitch marker. And now you can see we have this opening here for the sleeve. So now we are perfectly set up here with our yarn and our hook at the very bottom of the opening of the sleeve. So I don't have to cast off or anything. We can just get started on the sleeve. So I'm going to go ahead and chain 1. And after you have chained 1, I'm actually going to go ahead and flip the sweater right side out so that this design is facing the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up my hook again with that yarn, and this first row we're just going to go ahead and place 1 single crochet into every single stitch all the way around this opening here. So starting in this very first stitch, I'm just going to insert my hook and place 1 single crochet into every single one of these stitches all the way around the opening of the sleeve. Okay, and I have now reached the end of that row. I'm placing a single crochet right into the last stitch, and here you can see that first stitch where we started off on this row. I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook right into that first stitch, pick up some yarn, and slip stitch, therefore making it 1 round row. I'm then going to go ahead and chain 1. And now just like before, I'm going to go ahead and flip the entire sweater back inside out so the wrong side of this design is facing the outside. Alright, so now I have it flipped with the wrong side facing out again, and the only reason why I flipped it inside out that first time is because otherwise the seam for the sleeve is a little bit weird when it sits onto the sweater. So that very first row of the sleeve you want to do with the right side facing out just to make the seam sit better. So I'm going to go ahead and start by doing this next row. And this next row, I'm going to start off with a decrease because we do want to make this sleeve just a little bit more narrow. So I already, whether I'm decreasing or not, skip the stitch here that our chain 1 comes out of. This is the stitch that we slip stitched into. You're going to skip that in every single row, whether it's a decrease or not. So then into this next stitch is where you typically would then begin the next row, but because we're decreasing, I'm going to skip that one as well and go into the third stitch here. So right into this stitch, I'm going to then place a single crochet. So I skipped over the first stitch of the project, and so that is our decrease, and I'm then going to go ahead and place a single crochet into every single stitch all the way around this opening back to the start of the row. One thing I forgot to mention also, when you're working on the sleeve, you want to make sure you're working from the inside out with your hook. So I have the handle of my hook facing the middle of the sleeve with the top of my hook facing out. So instead of working in this way, I'm working this way. And that will be important once you get to the design, just to make sure you have it facing the right way and you're working from the right side of the sleeve. So just make sure you're working from the inside of the sleeve, not the outside. Okay, so now that I've reached the end of my row, I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook right into that first stitch we made of that row, and I'm going to slip stitch together, therefore completing my row. I'm then going to chain one and turn my work. And that is all there is to it for the sleeve. You're just going to continue working in a round in that same way. We're going to place a single crochet into every single stitch and then slip stitch at the end and turn your work. And now when it comes to decreasing the sleeve and making it a little bit more narrow, you only want to decrease in every other row, not every single row, because when you decrease, that is going to cinch in the project. You are eliminating an entire stitch from the row. So if you decrease in every single row, it's going to be a drastic change where the sleeve just immediately cinches in. So in order to avoid that and have it be a more gradual slope where you're bringing the sleeve and sort of tapering it in, you want to decrease in every other row instead of every single row. So in this next row, instead of skipping this stitch, I'm going to insert my hook right into that stitch and then go ahead and start doing a normal row of single crochet. And then in the next row, I'm going to skip that stitch, therefore completing a decrease. So in every other row, I'm going to do a decrease, and I'm going to go ahead and do a couple rows here with both the normal crochet and then the decrease row, and I'm going to keep track of how many rows I am doing and whether or not they're decreased. Okay, so I've now finished with my decrease rows. I have done 8 rows since the beginning of the sleeve, which means 4 of those rows had a decrease. So I've done 4 decreases so far, and that brings the sleeve to be about 9 inches across when it's just laid flat like so. And it still looks a little bit funky when I'm trying it on just because it's still quite a short sleeve, but the opening here I've decided is the perfect width. So I'm going to stop here with my decreases, and now I'm just going to continue my rows like normal without any decrease. And I'm going to continue doing rows here until the sleeve reaches a couple inches above my elbow. I went ahead and did 20 rows here of just regular crochet, no decreases, so then when I try this on, the sleeve lands just a little bit above my elbow. So now we can go ahead and add our very first design for the sleeve. So I'm going to be bringing back tapestry crochet, and I'm also going to be repeating the exact same design that we did at the start of the sweater, the design here at the very bottom, with that sort of zigzag line and then the diamond or plus signs in the middle, and then that zigzag line again at the top to finish it off. I will be putting the graph up here on the screen so you can follow along. And now remember that with tapestry crochet, there is always a right and a wrong side. And in order to keep your design crisp and clear, you want to make sure that the yarn you're working with, the loose yarn here, is on the wrong side at all times. So the inside of the sleeve is going to be the right side because we're going to be turning our sweater inside out. And then the outside of the sleeve is the wrong side. So make sure your design is implemented in a way that the inside of the sleeve is the right side, the outside is the wrong side. So now I'm going to go ahead and follow the graph that I have here on the screen to complete this design for the sleeve, and I'll see you once I'm done making the design. So here I have my design completed, and now I already went ahead and casted off the blue color here, and I'm just going to repeat the exact same thing I did before, where I'm just doing a couple rows here of just simple single crochet all the way around. I'm not doing any decreases, I'm just doing normal rows, and I'm going to continue doing these rows until the sleeve reaches the bottom of the sweater. So until I have the sleeve in line with this design here at the bottom of my sweater, I'm going to go ahead and just continue making rows until it reaches that length. So I went ahead and just added another 30 rows here of the plain white single crochet, which brings the sleeve to be about 7 inches long from the design down to the bottom of the sleeve. And when I try this on, the sleeve lands right at the top of the bottom design on the sweater, which is perfect because now we can repeat the exact same design that we did higher up here on the sleeve, now at this portion of the sleeve. And this is going to be gorgeous because this design will line up with the bottom of the design of the sweater and create one just cohesive line of the design across the sweater, and it looks so pretty. So now I'm going to go ahead and bring back in my blue yarn, And I'm just going to go ahead and do tapestry crochet just like I did before. I'm going to do the exact same design that I did up here at the top of the sleeve, and I'll see you once I'm done with that design. And so here is that sleeve with the second design completed. So we've got both designs here. I also went ahead and did one row of just plain white crochet as well at the bottom. And when you try on the sweater, the sleeve should land about an inch or two above your wrist. That way we have plenty of room to do the ribbing at the bottom of the sleeve. So once that's done, you're going to go ahead and make a second sleeve using the exact same number of rows and stitch count, which I already did here. You're going to do the same thing where you slip stitch up the side of the project and then work in a round to make this sleeve with the same number of rows that you did with the first sleeve. So now we can get started on the ribbing details for the sweater, and I'm going to start working on the collar. I'm going to pick one of these two shoulders. I'm just going to go with this one to the right, and I'm going to insert my hook right into one of these stitches here along the shoulder portion where the two panels come together. So right into this first stitch here, I'm just going to insert my hook. It doesn't really matter which stitch you pick, you just want it to be right at that shoulder portion of the project. I'm then going to bring in my yarn and I'm going to pull this through. And now you're going to chain as many chains as you want the collar to be tall, with one additional chain that we use for turning. So I'm going to be doing 8 chains because I want the collar to be 7 chains tall. So I'm going to do 8. And now we're going to be working right back into that same chain back towards the project. So I'm going to be placing 1 single crochet into every single one of these chain stitches back to the collar of the sweater. So I have now placed my last single crochet stitch into this chain here. I'm going to go back to the stitches here along the collar, and this stitch is where our chain is coming out of. So I'm going to go right into the next stitch, insert my hook, and then slip stitch. Like so, and that's going to bring this chain section flush with the collar of the sweater. I am then going to go into the very next stitch here, and I'm going to again slip stitch, and then I'm going to turn my work. So now we can work our way back up this same little single crochet section that we've been making. And now typically into this very first stitch, you would just insert your hook and pick up some yarn and do a single crochet. But because we're doing a rib crochet, instead of just going into the whole stitch here, I'm going to flip my work so I can see the top of the project. And at the top, you can see that there's 2 loops that make up 1 stitch. There's 2 strands of yarn. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up the back strand of the yarn. And I'm going to insert my hook and then do a single crochet into that back strand. So again, into this next stitch, instead of going into the entire stitch, I'm going to go up to the top here and then insert my hook right in between those 2 strands of yarn, picking up the back loop and then doing a single crochet. And that's how you create that sort of elastic rib shape. And now at the very top of the project here, into our very last stitch, I'm going to insert my hook as I normally would without a rib crochet. So I'm going to pick up both strands of that loop and just place a normal single crochet. So I then chained 1, I'm going to turn my work, and then we're going to work our way back down to the sweater in the same manner. So in this very first stitch, I'm doing a normal single crochet. And then into the next stitch, instead of doing a single crochet, I'm going to go up to the top of the project, pick up just the back loop, and then do my single crochet into just the back loop. And now at the bottom of the row, we have the body of the sweater here. I'm going to insert my hook right into the next stitch, and I'm going to slip stitch, therefore securing this ribbed portion back down to the collar. I'm then going into the stitch right after it. I'm going to slip stitch again, like so. I'm then going to turn my work and then rib crochet all the way back up with a single crochet at the very first stitch, and then chain 1 and work my way all the way back down. So I'm just going to continue doing these little rows of rib crochet all the way around the collar, and I'll see you once I reach the end of the collar for the sweater. And here is the ribbing for that collar completed. I worked it all the way around. It fits so much better now than it did before we added the collar. And here you can see where I ended with the ribbing, and I'm just going to leave this part open here, and we're going to go ahead and cast off. I'm going to leave quite a bit of yarn in the tail when I cut the yarn. That way we can use that to sew up the collar later. Once I'm done adding the ribbing to the entire sweater, I'm going to go back with this loose yarn and just stitch the 2 sides together back down to the sweater. That way it can be one solid circle of ribbing. And then I'm also going to add the same ribbing to the bottom of the sweater. So I'm just going to find one of these points here where I connected the panels, and I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook right into one of those stitches. I'm then just going to bring my yarn back and pull it right through, and I'm going to do the exact same number of chains I did for the ribbing at the top of the collar. That way the ribbing can be the same height in every portion of the sweater. So I did 8 chains before, so I'm going to do 8 chains again. like so. And then just like before, I'm going to start by just placing a single crochet into every single chain stitch all the way back down to the sweater. And now into this next stitch, I'm going to insert my hook and then slip stitch, bringing this portion of our single crochets flush with the sweater. I'm then going into the stitch right after that one, and I'm again going to slip stitch and then turn my work. And then like I did with the collar, I'm simply going to place one rib crochet into every single stitch up to the top. And then once I reach that 7th or that top stitch of the row, I'm going to do just one single crochet instead of a rib crochet. I'm then going to chain 1, turn my work, start the row with that single crochet, and then rib crochet right back down to the project where I can then slip stitch into the next 2 stitches and then work my way back up, and repeat that process all the way along the bottom of this sweater as well as the bottom of both sleeves. So I'm going to go ahead and finish adding this rib crochet to the bottom of the sweater and the bottom of the sleeves, and I'll see you once the entire sweater is completed with the rib crochet borders. Okay, so now that the ribbing is completed on both the collar, both the sleeves, and the bottom of the sweater, you're going to want to take those loose ends that we have from casting off originally and just thread a needle through that yarn and stitch up the ribbing together to make those closed circles, which as you can see here, I already completed on my sweater. So after that's completed, I'm now going to go ahead and just weave in all of these loose ends before flipping the sweater right side out so we can have our pretty design in the front. And that pretty much just sums up how to make this sweater. So I'm going to go ahead and weave in all these loose ends, and then I'll show you the final results. Here is what the sweater looks like after I steamed it. So here's the finished sweater. I am so proud of how it turned out. You already saw it in the intro of this video, but I really hope that you liked the way your sweater turned out, and if you made one, then please share it with me either in my Instagram DMs or tagging me in any pictures. I am so excited to see all of you wearing this pattern because I am so proud of this design, and if you haven't already, then please subscribe and like this video. This design did take me over a month to put together, so all of your support means so much to me and allows me to keep going and making more elaborate designs like these, because I do have a couple more ideas of more advanced crochet I want to start doing. So any support really helps me to continue doing that, such as subscribing, liking the video, commenting, sharing the video with someone. All of that is so appreciated. So thank you so much for watching this video and for being here with me. I will see you again very soon with another tutorial. So until then, I hope you have a great rest of your day or a great rest of your week. Christmas is right around the corner for me right now, so if that's the same for you, I hope you have a great Christmas as well, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.